Welcome back to GTM. Today I have the Seneca Dragonfly Mk2. It is a 177 caliber rifle, and it's sitting right next to a Benjamin 397S that's also in 177 caliber. This video is not intended to be a comparison or an overall or outright review. I'm just talking about the way I've used the rifle and some things I've noticed. There might be some slight comparison, but that's just because they're both multi-pumps. They're both around $200. MSRP is going to be right around there, and they both have more money attached to them than they actually cost in the first place. But I like one of them more than the other, and I think an appropriate place to start would be with the Dragonfly Mk2. Just talk about what I've done to it. I did add a length of pull adjustment there, a limb saver, a cheek riser, some Eagle Vision Infinity 34mm rings, along with an Element Titan 5-25. That was a very appropriate optic for this, I found. And an Atlas bipod with some Picatinny I had to mount in underneath. And then on the very end of the barrel, one of my favorite things to talk about is buck rail. Buck rail makes a lot of aftermarket parts for air rifles, and I find that they are incredibly reliable. This one in particular is something that has an interior, like a clip-in steel thread, and so it's not polymer or 3D printed material that's threading in. It is technically metal on metal, and I really like that. I'll go ahead and show you how that works here on the adapter. The adapter for the Dragonfly Mk2 actually has two portions, and so you could put two different thread pitches on there depending on the device that you have. Obviously I prefer the buck rail that I already have in my hands there, but this is pretty cool, and I think it makes the rifle much more versatile for a lot of people. So the rifle does come with iron sights, and obviously they're fine. One has a fiber optic front sight, you know, and I would say that's an improvement over a lot of air rifle optics, or sights rather. Just having fiber optic in general is good. It's a good start, but the rear sight was pretty plain and also plastic. Not overly reliable, so go ahead and take care of that. But as far as a can goes, head over and check out Buck Rail. I have a link in the description. I am an affiliate, and so I'll put that up front. I'm an affiliate, but I was running the stuff before they ever sent anything to me, and obviously I wouldn't be running it if I didn't like it or it didn't improve my system. You can see everything else I put together on this rifle. This is really a maximized build, if you will. The best that I can put together for, you know, a $200 rifle. It's got a lot more than $200 on it right now. So loading up the magazine, that's another thing. I'm using some Norma 9.1 grain heavy pellets. I found them to work pretty well. I'll talk about accuracy in a little bit. But these pellets loading into this magazine, first of all, you move the window, the glass piece sideways, and there's a little spring inside. It helps it kind of bounce back, and it's a little funky because you have to load them backwards, guys. You load them with a skirt going into the magazine, which is really frustrating at times. You gotta load it up right, and I would like to say that it's finicky just because I'm on camera, but that's not true. It's just finicky in general, and I struggled with it on a number of different kinds of pellets, especially larger pellets with a little bit wider skirt to it. Obviously just didn't fit that well, and you have to line it up so right, and man, it was kind of frustrating. But the redemption is, once it's loaded up and you're using it, it feeds really well, and that's kind of the main thing. So I can put up with the funky loading and the frustrating system here, where I gotta tap it. I can put up with that if it loads and I should say reliably feeds from the magazine into the chamber, and it does. So that's what it looks like, the glass side obviously there, and then there's the back side. And underneath, if you can see that, there's a magnet, and that's how it finds its home reliably each time, and it slides right in, right out. And I think that's actually a pretty good design. You can kind of see, so again, the glass side is the side that faces you technically, and I'll show you what that looks like sliding in. So very simple. The magnet is a good idea, it's a good design, and it's reliable. I found it to work every time. Slips right in, finds its home, much better than other systems I've seen out there, although the actual loading of the magazine itself is a little finicky. So moving on to the pumping process, absolutely it is going to be hard to ever go back to something that doesn't have this. I'm going to tell you that it is unique enough and functions well enough. It really is smooth. Just the amount of effort obviously is the same each time roughly when you're pumping it, and it just doesn't feel very hard at all. It doesn't fatigue you the same way that a normal multi-pump or a 10 pump would. So as I'm pulling the trigger here, there's definitely some stacking, and it's a little frustrating. If I'm going to be honest with you, the trigger is something I'll have to talk about in a second, but the bolt itself is pretty smooth. Running it through the magazine is pretty smooth. The pumping process is pretty smooth, so there's definitely redemptive aspects to the rifle to help me deal with that trigger, which is not a match trigger. It's not a good two-stage trigger, although this single-stage trigger feels like a two-stage trigger because of the stacking, and you get to a weird spongy place. I guess it's a wall, if you want to call it that, and there's too much over travel. It does frustrate me a little bit. Another thing I should mention about the magazine, and this is just a good thing to know, make sure that you don't make an error and really break something or ram it home. If your magazine is empty, the bolt will not go forward. The probe will not go forward. There's not a hole there. There's a little blockade just to stop you, and it lets you know that it's time to load up again. Probably a good feature. I've had a couple issues with it, but it's pretty good. Normally the bolt goes forward really smooth though. You can see there I barely put any effort in there. The bolt is a little bit small. I like the bolt handle. Okay, it's a little small, but I appreciate that it's not a full 90-degree throw. It's just a very limited economy of motion, I guess you would say. It's not too much, and it doesn't get in the way of the rings or the optic. Had no issues with that really whatsoever, other than the very small surface area for mounting an optic. So go ahead and go a little closer here. You can see it's nice and smooth. It is threaded in, and so I believe if somebody makes an aftermarket piece, you could find out the thread pitch for that and go ahead and throw in a bigger bolt if you want to. And I definitely intend to, if this gun continues to do well, and so far it has done pretty well, other than the trigger. So the trigger, I'm going to go ahead and just show you two different pull weights here. The first time, I'm going to take the safety off obviously. The first time pulling it through, not really any stacking, pretty consistent for the most part, other than those two stages that shouldn't be there. And I pulled at 3 pounds, 2.9 ounces. That's not bad. I'm not going to complain about that, but I just want to show you that you're going to find a lot of difference with this. Typically when I pull the trigger, this is what I was getting. Just under 4 pounds. This is 3 pounds, 10.3 ounces. Usually that's what it's like, and the second part of the pull is very spongy. It's hard to find the wall. It's not a crisp trigger. I heard somebody say that already, that it's a crisp trigger. It is not a crisp trigger whatsoever. For velocity, let's take a look at velocity real quick. I did 10 pumps most of the time, and that's what I zeroed with, actually, just for dwell time and accuracy, velocity. It just seemed to line up the best and get good results. And so I was getting very consistently right around 691 was my velocity most of the time. And I think that's probably what you can expect. Obviously, 661. Let me make that correction. 661 for 10 pumps. With the Benjamin, I was getting 691. All right, so real briefly, I just want to talk over some groups that I shot. Now, this was shot on a relatively windy part of the day. I shot 2 groups that day for each kind of pellet because I wanted to give it a fair shake. So I'm going to show you a target in a second with less wind, but this is when it was windy. That's real world conditions. And I didn't measure the wind, but if I had a Kestrel, it would probably be like 8 or 9 mile an hour winds at 33 yards. It's with 7 pumps. That does matter, by the way. I zeroed it with 10 pumps. I'll just say that. But 7 pumps is what I did this test on. So it's a little bit slower. It's right about the midway point for pumping effort, even though each pump is consistent and it's the same weight as far as the numerical amount of pumps that you probably do. Okay, 7's towards the middle. So Crosman 7.9 grain, hollow points, a little stringy vertically. Obviously the wind was playing a little bit of a role right there, but elevation wise, not too much change there. Probably worth playing around with that a little bit more, but not impressive. Without the flyer in there, it's 1.69 or 619 inches. Excite dome pellets, not amazing performance. Without the flyer in there, that was 1.475 inches. Norma did pretty well. It's worth continuing with. That's Norma 9.1 grainers, and those are newer. I haven't messed around with those a lot, but I'm seeing some good results with them from okay, the furthest I've shot right now is 120 yards. So 120 yards and in, I'm seeing good results with those. Without the flyer, it's 0.759 inches. I was looking for half-inch groups. That's really what I want to see from the rifle, but in the wind, that's not bad. I'm okay with that in the wind, actually. Crosman 7.9 wad cutters. This one's kind of interesting. If you can see that, get it in the light a little better. There's 3 there just about touching, real tight, under 1/4 inch. And then there's 2 flyers down here. So without one of the flyers, it's 1.126 inches, but obviously there's 3 of them real tight together. Probably worth investigating a little more. kind of windy, but it could just been the trigger stacking. You know, that trigger weight really got to me a number of times. Fatigue got to me because of the trigger weight and that second stage, even though it doesn't have a second stage. RWS 7.0 wad cutters without the flyer, 0.610. Not terrible. I probably could investigate that a little further. That's not bad. It's real close to what I saw with the Norma 9.1. And then here, the Excite spikes. I had one clear flyer up here, and the rest are, you know, right around, let's see, without the flyer, it's 1.119 inches, but it was windy, and so I kind of threw that away. It was just a general reference. And again, I'm not actually thinking I'm going to hit the dot. I'm just making sure it's on paper, and I'm looking at group size. That's all I'm looking at. I want to know about group size before I pick a pellet to zero with. So that was kind of a throwaway target, actually. I waited till there was basically no wind, and there is some difference here, but it's not as much as I had hoped. 7.9 grain Crosman. There's 4 shots down here, and then there is a flyer up there. I think that was a bad trigger pull. I really felt the trigger stacking on that one. It bothered me a lot because I thought it would be a tight group. 1.418 inches is what it is. Excite Dome, 1.25 inches. That's, again, I'm taking out the flyer here. There's a real bad flyer. I tried to X out anything that didn't count, or it was clearly me. Norma 9.1, again, a decent group, 0.654 inches. Flyer up there. I feel like that's possibly going to be the one to go to, but we'll just see. Moving on, Crosman 7.9 wad cutters. You know, pretty respectable group for what it is. It's not really an amazing pellet in a lot of rifles, but it's fine right here. 0.832 inches. RWS 7.0. This one was a little less good. So 1.209 inches, even when I subtract the flyer there. And then lastly, Excite spikes. That was 0.875 inches on that one right there. So the reason that I did this ultimately was, you can go ahead and freeze that if you need to see that again. The reason I did that ultimately is I want to find out what pellet makes the most sense for the rifle and what I'm going to zero with. I don't like shooting just a variety of pellets all the time. I like knowing the best one for long range, and usually that's the best for close range too, most of the time. A couple of dependents are going to be how many pumps you have, dwell time, how long it's actually in the rifle itself, in the barrel or the chamber. You know, you pull the trigger and it doesn't immediately leave. It takes a little bit of time, and so movement and the follow-up on the trigger, over travel, these are things that I'm a little bit critical of on the rifle right now, and they are affecting shot placement. The trigger stacking, trigger weight, some of these variables I definitely see I need to practice more with it. I've got hundreds of rounds now through the pellet rifle, but I need to practice more on the trigger. I probably need to modify the trigger, but with the groups that I see now, it's already better than the Benjamin 397S. It's better. It's absolutely better. I think it's got some improvement that they could bring to it in Model 3. All right, so Model 3, start working on that, Air Venturi or Seneca. That one needs to have a better trigger, and I'm sure if it had a better trigger, those groups would all be half the size. The trigger was such a piece of the issue for each time when I was pulling it. It stacked, it was too heavy, it threw the shot off. It just added extra anxiety to the shot rather than just a nice matched trigger, which I think the barrel is good. I think the design is good. I don't think there's, you know, too many other issues with it. I think the pump pressure is consistent. When I was running it over a chronograph, numbers looked pretty good, better than the Benjamin did. And so all of that seems good. It's just that trigger, it's not ideal. So there's some groups. If you have one of these, maybe you want to go ahead and try those pellets out and tell me if you get similar results. I'd be fascinated to know if you just shoot differently than I do.
Hey, I got something to say. I'm just so sick of hearing everyone complain. I know it's tough and I know there's pain, but hitting bottom is the only